we have a president who's often targeting reporters as enemies of the people. We've seen our mayors and our governors also sniping at reporters when they ask questions based on the stories of the day. So it may seem at times like it's us versus them. But for one night a year, not including the dress rehearsal, the media takes center stage in New York City to poke fun at our elected officials, and it's all for a good cause. For about a century, the Inner Circle is held every spring where NYC journalists roast our elected leaders. Now, I've been attending this since I first came to the city more than 2 decades ago, and I was there when then Mayor Giuliani dressed up in drag, and Mayor Bloomberg later took the stage with a cast of Broadway shows. So I thought it would be fun to find out what's in store this year, and if there's been enough good fodder to put on a show. So with that, I'd like to bring on my first guest, the director of the Inner Circle, Shelly Strickler. Welcome to City Watch.
Well, good afternoon, Jeff. It's nice to speak to you and to be on WBAI once again.
You knew I was going to ask that. So for our listeners, please tell us about your WBAI connection.
Well, when I decided that I would like to be a radio reporter, and there weren't many women doing serious radio news in the very early 70s, there were a few, the first thing I did was volunteered at WBAI, where I learned to use a tape recorder and went out and covered stories for WBAI. And very shortly thereafter, I went to Newburgh, New York for a stint, and I went to New Brunswick for a stint, ended up at WOR Radio in 1978, and retired a number of years ago.
So WBAI launched your career.
Look at that.
So let's talk about the Inner Circle. First, give us a sense of the Inner Circle's history.
Okay, first of all, the Inner Circle began in 1922, but it wasn't called the Inner Circle. It was called the Amen Corner, or the Association of City Hall Reporters. And it was known as a stunt dinner. And they used to do skits with songs. And the most interesting part of it, Jeff, all men, no women, which is not surprising because there weren't many women or any women in City Hall Room 9 at the time. And from there, it got bigger and bigger. It was performed at various hotels, ended up in the Hilton in the 70s, where it still will be played this year. And it got bigger and bigger in the sense that we kept adding things. Now, of course, I didn't start in 1922. I first became a member in 1982. And at that time, we already had a full orchestra, a musical director. We hired a choreographer. We had a full, at that time, 3 acts. Now we only have 2 acts. And we put on an extravaganza. At this point, in 2019, our show, you know, what you have is a bunch of kind of reporter, kind of wannabe performers who absolutely love each year to spend weeks rehearsing and getting up on that stage. And I'll tell you, our show has gotten so close to, I don't want to say professional, but if you come to see it, you will see that you're saying, these are reporters from New York City. It is amazing.
How do the politicians react to the show? Because often, you know, you're tweaking them on often sensitive topics.
It's very interesting. What we have found over the years is that a reporter, a politician, is more upset if he's not a character in the show at all. In most cases, it just doesn't matter what fun you make of them. In some cases, we've had a problem. There have been politicians who have come up to me and have said, how come I didn't have a bigger part? One of them was the ex-police commissioner Ray Kelly. He once came up to me and said, Shelley, how come I don't have a bigger part in this show? And I said, Ray, we don't know any scandal about you. As far as we know, you've never cheated on your wife. We really don't know what we can do to make fun of you. And he laughed, and of course, then we gave him bigger parts.
So what makes a great skit, a great song and dance number?
Well, I think you know what the most important thing in our show is that it is funny. That's the first thing that makes it what Inner Circle is. We are a spoof show. And what we want is for people to laugh, to have a good time. We are equal opportunity offenders. That's the way we like to look at ourselves. So that hopefully, whatever side of the aisle you're on, you're not going to get over offended because you realize what we're doing to one, we are also doing to the other. The other thing that makes this a great show, especially in the last 20 years or so, or even more, we have a great musical director. Her name is Kathy Beaver, and she has taught us how to sing. I mean, where do you see the harmonies? They get better and better. And this year, besides having our professional dance coach, Tony Parisi, Hazel Sanchez from WCBS television, she is also choreographing some of the numbers. And those who might be listening who have seen Inner Circle before know what a terrific dancer and performer she is. And so, yeah, the elements are music and fun and laughter and making fun of everybody.
What's the theme of the show or the title of the show this year?
Well, the title of the show is, remember that it's 2 acts. The first act is basically about city politics, and the second act is about state and national politics. So actually the name of the show is Off the Rails. Get it? Off the rails, everything's going nuts, and the subways, right, the MTA, the feuds, etc. And we're calling the second act Off the Wall. And so, of course, that brings in the whole idea of the Trump administration and what might be happening in that act. The first act, we have so many things to concentrate on. Controversy after controversy. You know what one of the biggest and most fun ones that we're working on, or that has already been worked on, is the whole Amazon controversy, Amazon leaving town. And then there are other, the Cuomo-de Blasio feud, of course, the MTA, the bike lines in the city, NYCHA. I mean, you'd say, how can you make fun of NYCHA? It's such a serious topic. But you know what? Some of the goings-on, as you all know, between the parties and among the parties and how sometimes it's bumbling, whatever. These are things that we work in, and we try to do it in a way that people understand that what we are actually doing is having fun, yes, at the expense of the politicians, but also we are enjoying presenting politicians in a whole different way. You know, I would say think Saturday Night Live or any of those shows, but we strive to be different. We don't like to be a Saturday Night Live or late night comedy show. Like, as a matter of fact, in our second act, although, of course, President Trump is a major part of it, he might not be the center of it. What we're concentrating on this year is what's going on with, well, let's say the Democratic field and the candidates who are in it and all of that's going on around that. And we have several numbers that deal with that. We have a number with Nancy Pelosi and Chuck Schumer. And, of course, the local politicians we love to get in because they come to our show.
So in these politically sensitive times, are there fears of unnerving some in the audience?
You know, we try very hard not to worry too much about that because then we would never write anything. But there have been times, there have been some times, some of them I don't even know if I'm going to mention. But what comes to my mind is this was just before I actually got into the organization, early 80s, late 70s. Bella Abzug, who was a congresswoman at the time, she got upset that was something that was going on, and she walked out. At one time, Governor Mario Cuomo, not that he walked out, but he was a little upset that we were mentioning his Italian heritage. This was many, many, many years ago. The year I was president, 1993, Liz Holtzman, who was a congresswoman, we portrayed her, and she's a friend of mine, we portrayed her as a witch. And, you know, that's kind of hard to sit there and see that she was running against Emmanuel Seller, and the campaign was a little rough. And the whole theme was supposed to be a haunted house. This was Mayor Dinkins' last year, but we didn't know it was his last year. But, yeah. So, yes, there have been people who have been upset. Not too many have walked out. But I'll tell you something. One year, we are doing the show, and we didn't realize until 3 months later what we had done and why that person wasn't upset and maybe walked out. Think about this. Anthony Weiner got in trouble the first time in June of that year. I think it might be 2011. I'm not 100% sure. Our show was in March. That year, there was an incident with an upstate congressman who had sent a photo of the upper part of his body to someone on Craigslist. And so what we did was, in the opening monologue done by the president, who was Mark Lieberman at the time, we did this little skit, and we had a video of this congressman up on the screen with a naked chest. And then we're saying, how could we make this local? Let's think of the least likely politician that we know that would be caught like this. And we put Weiner's head on this congressperson's body. Now, this was in March. It didn't come out till June. And when it did come out, what Weiner had done, the sexting and all of that, we said to ourselves, oh, my God, how did Weiner ever remain so calm? Didn't he say to himself, oh, my God, they're on to me? As a matter of fact, my husband and I were chatting with him at intermission or at the end of the show, and he was perfectly fine. Interesting.
So Shelly, we've got about 2 minutes left, and I really want to mention about where the money goes to that you raise.
Yes.
Can you talk a little about that?
Of course. As you might imagine from what I described to you before, we have a lot of expenses. After expenses, every single red cent goes to charities, a number of charities that Inner Circle members select. And the charities are New York City charities, and they are needy charities, not necessarily the biggest charities that you can think of. We are very, very adamant about making sure that everything goes to charity. Our expenses are big. We have a dinner, we have costumes, we have an orchestra, we have orchestrations, and we have a professional musical director and choreographer. They do not take a lot of money. I mean, they know what they're working for and that the money is going to charities. But we try to give away as much as we can each year, and we really feel very, very good about that.
What is the date of the show?
The date of the show, of the Saturday night show, is April 27th at the New York Hilton.
And where should people go to learn more?
www.innercircleshow.org. www.innercircleshow.org.
And before I forget, now I saw James Ford tweeted that he's going to be de Blasio. Who's playing Governor Cuomo?
James Ford of Pix 11 is playing Mayor de Blasio, and Richie Steyer of
the Chief.
The Chief, of course, the Chief. He is playing Governor Cuomo. Yes, and you can imagine, right? I mean, they're such frenemies, right? So you can imagine what's going to come with that.
So, Shelly Strickler, thank you so much for joining me here on WBAI today.
It was a pleasure. Thank you, Jeff.
So another edition of City Watch is coming to a close. I'd like to thank our guests today, New York City Council member Richie Torres, Partnership for the Homeless CEO and President Anya Duggan, and who you just heard, Shelly Strickler, Director of the Inner Circle. Also, I'd love to thank our engineer, Sean Rhodes, who always makes this a flawless experience. And thank you to you, our listeners, for supporting this show. We're simply unable to do this without your generosity. Remember, if you missed any part of this show or you just want to listen to it again, the MP3 download is available at www.wbai.org. You can click on Archives and then City Watch. The show will be up and ready online in about 10 minutes and stay up for 90 days. Have a wonderful day.
I see trees of green,